what's going on, guys? This is Goody with Low Carb Logic. I'm here with Klaus and Jeff Browning, aka Bronco Billy. Jeff is a trail runner. He's one of the best in the game. He's one of the coolest in the game. He's been doing it for over 2 decades. Originally started with mountaineering, right?
Actually, mountain biking.
Mountain biking. Just all around a beast with endurance sports, and really excited to learn a little bit about your fitness and dietary approach. So thanks for being here, Jeff. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Stoked to be here.
Sweet. So I guess we'll just get it started. Just like a little backup information in case anybody doesn't really know who Jeff is. I know a lot of people aren't in the trail running community, but Jeff, just the last race that I know that you participated in, I haven't been keeping track too much, is I know you did the Cocodona 250 and you were like winning the entire race. I mean, it's a win in my book. And then like within the last mile or two, you get passed by Harry's, what is it, Subuertas, or how do you pronounce his last name?
Yeah, Harry's last name is, man, I'm drawing a blank on his last name.
It's Suebertas, I think. I don't know how I know that.
So, yeah, Harry, yeah, I had some breathing issues, which I'd never had before. I had an upper respiratory infection like 3 weeks out, and it was lingering until about 4 or 5 days before the race, and kind of symptoms went away. But after talking to a few docs afterwards, like post race, they were saying, yeah, you still have a viral load during that time, and all you need is a stressor to like kind of bring back symptoms. And it came out as like a swollen airway. So I couldn't breathe through my mouth. I could only nose breathe the last like 50 miles. So I slowed down quite a bit the last 50 miles, and he caught me with like 2 miles to go. But I was walking. I could jog like 40 yards. Then I'd have to stop and try to catch my breath through my nose. And you know, at the end of the race, you're at 7,000 feet and you go up over 90, almost 9,300 feet at the top of Eldon with like 8 miles to go. So I had to go up over a kind of a higher mountain, and that really shot my pulse ox way down. Like at the finish line, my pulse ox was 83 after 30 minutes of sitting. Yeah, so it's probably in the 70s going over Eldon. Which clinically I should have been hospitalized.
Adrenaline.
But whatever, man. I mean, I told my wife, like, my body's used to being hypoxic, you know, doing all these high altitude mountain races. So, I was able to, you know, I just was lightheaded and felt like I was going to pass out a couple times on the descent.
Yep.
So I kept having to stop, and he slowly kind of closed the gap, and then finally caught me. And then I just walked it in for a second. After that, it was like I looked at the track, you know, there's a tracker. So we're carrying GPS on us, and there's a live tracker and a live feed. So we were like, I had my pacer like check the tracker to see where third was. He wasn't even close. So I was like, I knew, you know, this is my backyard because I'm from Flagstaff and it finishes in downtown Flagstaff. So I knew exactly where it was, what I had left. And I was like, yeah, we can walk it in. He's not catching us. So I just walked it the rest of the way.
So just to paint a picture of the race itself. So this is a 250-mile race. It's through Arizona. What was the elevation gain, and then what was kind of the weather climate that you had to deal with? And also, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, just you were saying.
What did it take you? 70? How many hours?
60 hours.
60. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the previous course record was like 69 hours. So, you know, Harry ran like 59 and change. I ran just over 60. You know, I was on pace for probably a 57 or 58 had I not slowed down in that last like 80 due to the breathing stuff. And I was to the point I knew something was up when I went to do like a farmer blow on your nose and I had no pressure. You know, you just went and nothing came out, and like you couldn't get any pressure out of your nose. And I was like, what is going on? Anyway, yeah, it's about 40,000 feet of climbing. It kind of tours northern Arizona. It starts down in the desert just north of Phoenix, in Black Canyon City. So if anyone's ever driven from Phoenix to Flagstaff, you go through about 30 miles north of town. You kind of go through a little small town called Black Canyon City. It starts there and kind of goes up through the Bradshaw Mountains, through Prescott, up and over Mingus, down into Jerome, and through the desert and over to Sedona, up onto the rim, and through like Schnebly and Munns Park, and then kind of runs up to and loops around on the Arizona Trail, kind of loops around to the east side of Flagstaff, south and east side of town, And then on the north side of town, it goes up and over Eldon to finish goes through Buffalo Park, comes in from the north, finishes it through Buffalo Park, and then runs and finishes in downtown Flagstaff.
It's like a
So mostly
beautiful thing.
trail, some double tracks, a little bit of pavement, mostly mostly off road.
Yep. And also, if you don't mind me asking, what are you, 53?
53.
50? How did I know that? But yeah. So I mean, this is just incredible stuff. Multi-thousand feet elevation gain. Running at high elevations. 53 years old. This is a race that has a purse. So it's obviously very competitive. A lot of the guys are younger than you. Some half your age, and it doesn't speak anything to how you're performing or even how you look. You look way younger than 53.
Thanks.
Yes.
If you saw me up close, well, you could see the white in my beard, but there's a lot of wrinkles if you get close.
So obviously, like the elephant in the room is that if you're going to do an endurance activity that is just that, we'll call it insane. You have to be in a very good preparatory position. And from what I gather of the trail running community, a lot of people are very carb centric. So,
Yeah.
so when I think
Yeah,
of low
majority.
carb, yeah, I think of like you, Michael McKnight, and Anthony Kunkel. I guess just where did you kind of initially get the inspiration to do something like low carb? Like, was there someone that you were kind of influenced by, or did you kind of just take a leap of faith?
Well, I was a high carb athlete for 15 years of ultra running. I've been in it, 2025 is going to be my 25th season in the sports. I started kind of with, just really this kind of typical path. And I was a vegetarian in my 20s with my wife and I were, and then we had some health stuff going, especially my wife, after our first kid. And she was just having some health issues on vegetarian approach. I was losing muscle mass. I'd come from a mountain biking and strength training background. Had spent a lot of time in the weight room, had a pretty good muscular physique coming into mountain biking and into ultra running, and I was losing that on a vegetarian approach. So we did that maybe 7 years in our 20s, and then we actually shifted to a whole foods organic diet. So like still was doing grains and sugar and all that kind of stuff, but we were doing it more from a whole foods perspective. We kind of got rid of processed food in our diet for about 12 years. All through my 30s and into my early 40s to mid 40s, I was doing kind of a whole foods organic, but I was still high carb. So I ate a lot of like sprouted bread, and we soaked our rice and soaked our legumes, and to get rid of phytic acid and stuff like that. So we were trying to do it right. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Sally Fallon and the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Yes.
I'm drawing a blank on her book.
That's
Nourishing Traditions. So Nourishing Traditions was kind of our influence after we left vegetarianism in our late 20s into our 30s. And we did that. And I felt great for a lot of years, felt pretty good on it, and did okay. But I used to have to I bonked a lot. I had to really push high carb during a race, or else I'd bonk and have low spots. I was pushing 300 plus grams of carbs, or not 300 calories. So I was probably pushing 70 to 80 grams or 90 grams of carbs an hour, kind of similar to what the rage is right now in the performance arena of endurance sports is high carb, pushing really high carb.
Yeah, what was Gross? He was what, 100 plus?
100 to 120 grams of carbs an hour.
Yeah,
dude.
This is the guy that won. He won the 100 mile or
he ran Leadville 100 course record, which was Matt Carpenter's record, which has been around for 19 years. I was in the sport when Matt broke the Leadville record back in like whatever that was, 2004, 2005. I followed all his training for that. I read his blogs back then. He was very transparent on his training and his nutrition and everything else. So I was super into following that, and it was cool to see David do that. But it also brings up a good argument into like low carb versus high carb, and there's nuances to both, and if you're going to eat high carb in your lifestyle diet, then you're going to have to eat high carb to perform
for sure
races. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm the opposite. And so one of the things that happened with me, to kind of give you guys a quick fast forward into like my change, I was doing this high carb kind of like whole foods organic approach. And in 2000, end of 2000 or in 2015, I raced in South America a couple times and drank some probably questionable water. I had some health issues after getting back from a race in Chile, in like Patagonia, and I I really, that whole season 2015 was kind of plagued with, I had a staph infection, I had to go on antibiotics. We tried to get rid of it naturally, but that didn't work, and I ended up having to go to a kind of a naturopath and get antibiotics. We kind of worked together with this naturopath to try to figure out what's going on. We kind of narrowed it down to some kind of like a yeast overgrowth in my GI of some sort that was affecting me, and I was having like rashes and like these kind of like flare ups, I called them, of like really itchy, like in my gut, like inside. And so I would have these really bad flare ups where I wasn't thriving. I was getting to the point, and I if I look back at those photos even from that year, I looked inflamed, like I looked kind of puffy. It looked like I was, it just wasn't good. And I was like 44, right? So I was just chalking it up to being like, man, I think this sport is stressful on you. And I guess I'm kind of reaching the end of my like performance years,
Yeah.
And that was like kind of like a little sad, but also like, it was like, well, I guess maybe I just have to retire. And so my wife and I had chatted about that. Maybe I need to retire from like active like competition, maybe still run some, but like kind of step back. And I had talked to Zach Bitter. He was doing low carb at the time, and he kind of put me in contact. He and I were friends and on the same team. We were both sponsored by Ultra Footwear, and we had hung out and run together. And I was on the team, he was on the team, and so I called him first. He was my first kind of quote mentor in this. And I said, dude, well, back up. I kind of like spent about a week doing research. I probably did about 20, 30 hours worth of research, about 4 or 5 hours a night. I was a graphic designer during the day. And then at night, I would sit in front of my laptop after the kids were in bed and stay up till midnight, like researching, like, how do I get rid of this thing? Like, I knew enough about nutrition at the time to be like, okay, yeast feeds on sugar. I need to like figure this out. I'm sure I can manage this with diet. So, I'm not a big mainstream medicine person. I don't like to go to the doctor. I don't like to take pharmaceuticals. So I wanted to do the natural approach. So I sat down that whole week and I kind of stepped back from my laptop at the end of the week. And I told my wife, I think I need to go low carb. Like, I think I need to like starve the yeast it was initially just out of desperation to manage this like flare up issue with yeast,
Yes.
this like candida overgrowth in my
Yep.
GI. And so I said, okay, well, I got to starve it of sugar. That makes sense. I got to go super low carb. I told my wife I need to go like keto, like paleo, right? We got to cut out. And she was like, sweet. So my wife was a gymnast in college, D1, full ride scholarship, so she's always been in, and that sport has really got issues with eating. And one of the things she always has been into is we'd always dabbled in nutrition, and she'd always driven this kind of nutritional path of us going into this whole foods organic, first going vegetarian because we thought that was
Yep.
the way in the 90s. And
Yep.
and then and realizing it wasn't, and that it was like a propaganda machine. And we realized that, I came from big ag, corporate, farming in the Midwest. I grew up on a 700-acre farm with
Nice.
livestock too, commercial pork, beef, and corn, soybeans, and wheat. So I knew that model. I knew the lobbying, and I knew the subsidizing, and I knew all the whole background of that. We don't need to get into that because that'll get me on a
Another
soapbox.
episode.
Yeah,
We'll do
that's a whole
another one
nother
with you.
episode. That's a whole nother episode. But I knew enough from this path. She kind of just said, when I said that, she goes, I have 2 cookbooks. Like, she was already ready to roll. So we just immediately stopped right then. We like cut out carbs, and we went to like kind of a keto approach at first, because I went really strict at first. I called Zach Bitter. I said, this is what I'm going to do. And I was like, what should I do on my long runs? And so he kind of helped me start like piecing together a little bit of a strategy. Because I was 7 weeks out from Hurt 100 in Hawaii. It was in the winter. It was like December of 2015. December 1st, 2015, I said, I'm doing this. And I had to run 7 weeks later. I was supposed to run in mid-January, I was supposed to run Hurt 100. So I had to figure out, like, what am I doing, like, calorie wise? What am I doing gel wise? That kind of stuff. And so, but first I had to get this thing in check, right? So I had to go really low carb to starve the candida. So I did that first. He put me in contact with Peter Defty at vespapower.com. So Peter's like kind of a pioneer when it comes to like high fat, low carb and performance. He's kind of coined something called optimized fat metabolism, or OFM. And so I started talking to him, and we started talking about OFM, and I started working with him, and he really started, like, Zach did the initial mentoring, but Zach's a busy dude and he's training his butt off, running 100+ mile weeks. So we had a few phone calls, and then he kind of put me in contact with Peter, and Peter really took me under his wing and really started, like, kind of, educating me on, like, what I needed to do. And so we really worked on, like, just going keto for a while. I did the full, like, 4-week keto reset, like fully reset to get it in check. And I kept pretty low for a while. And then, like, maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks before Hurt, I brought back some strategic carbs, like fruit and a little bit of potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuff like that, strategically around effort and volume to, top off glycogen, get ready for the next workout, not mess with your thyroid, not mess with your hormones, right? Because you don't want to, in the endurance realm, when we start talking about low carb, you have to be careful not to be quote unquote a keto athlete, because keto's a tool to be used and leveraged, a meal here, a meal there, a reset here, a reset there, but not long term if you're training hard. So, because there's just not enough carb availability. So you have to either, if you have a metabolic issue you're trying to manage, you have to either err on the side of high protein, because gluconeogenesis will cover those glycogen needs with the high protein approach. And that's the way we coach it. We coach high protein approach in the endurance realm with low carb. So, 1 gram per pound of body weight is a minimum dose per day, but we recommend to most athletes, if they're especially in their big training, 1.1 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight of protein. So we focus on protein, animal proteins. So we call it animal based, right? Or animal centered. And then a diet. And then we bring in carbohydrates, vegetables and fruit, and potatoes, starches. So fruit and starches are strategic. Vegetables are all the time, like whenever, more of a keto type approach from veggies. But we don't really focus on it. We probably lean more towards, like, if you're familiar with Paul Saladino's work, he went from a really strict carnivore approach to more of what he calls carnivore 2.0, where he's using kind of a high protein approach, but he's also, like, balancing in fruit and starch and, like, raw honey, raw dairy, stuff like that. So that's kind of my approach. Is really his approach is very similar. And it wasn't that way at first. It was very strict keto at first. And then I had to learn to, like, use the strategic carbs from fruit and starch around effort and volume, and then bring back simple carbs on long runs and race day. And that's the only time we're using them. We're not using it in training. We only use them on long runs once a week, right?
Before the run?
What's that?
Like before the run?
During the run.
During the run.
So, like, some kind of IV carbohydrate drip, whether that's gels, whether that's a powdered drink mixed with electrolytes, that kind of stuff. So bringing back simple carbohydrates on long runs and races, which is what I did. That's what OFM kind of calls for, right? So this optimized fat metabolism approach for endurance sports is really bringing back strategic carbs around effort and volume. And sometimes that means simple carbs, on the long run. Any efforts over 2 hours, we're bringing back an IV drip of simple carbs, but we're not pushing that 190 grams an hour or 120 grams an hour like David Roche is. We're hitting like 40 to 60, 70 on a high end if you're a front of the pack runner. So if you're pushing the pace, your carbs need to go up a little more because of the output. But most of our middle back of the packers, they're going to be under 60 grams an hour because their output isn't at the level of an elite. So it's in context of how much those carbs get pushed per hour in an event or in a long run depends on effort, right? It depends on output. So you do need a little, like, carbs have a place, but they need to be strategic and we don't need to overuse them. That's the one thing that's really hit me is like, I can't overuse them because every time I do, if I get crazy for a month or two, I have the hint of a flare up again. So
Right.
whatever that is, I keep it in check with my diet, but it definitely comes back. And I find this with all my 40 plus athletes, when they get 40, 50 years old, you can't handle the carbs like you used to. You balloon up, you gain weight, you get overweight, you can't stay in race weight, you can't maintain a healthy body weight. You always have a little extra spare around the middle. I mean, that's all carbs. That little gut, that little inner tube around the middle of the 45 plus runner is all carbs, too many carbs. And you can offset that by just focusing that macro to protein instead of carbs and then using strategic carbs around your workouts.
What
Sounds
about
fantastic, Jeff. I have a question. What is your daily what is your daily and weekly meals typically look like? How many meals do you have, and what exactly do you eat?
3 to 4 meals a day, 3 to 5 hours apart. I try not to snack in between meals. So no snacking, meaning eat, let it burn. Especially as an older athlete, our protein synthesis slows down. So we need higher protein. And we also just in general put on weight easier when you're older. Like that's the craziest thing, like that you have to kind of come to terms with as an older athlete. You have to see, it's fine when you're 30. Like you can eat anything and you stay thin. And you can get down to race weight really fast, but it's not that way once you get older. Um, I typically try to eat, usually it's 3 main meals, but I try to shoot for 50 to 70 grams of protein per meal. So I'm shooting for I weigh 140 pounds. I'm 5'8", 140. So I try to shoot for 150 to 180 grams of protein a day. So I prioritize protein. And then I usually am no carbs in the mornings. So it's coffee with heavy whipping cream and maybe 4 or 5 eggs or eggs with cheese or something like that, or eggs with
that?
leftover meat. So it's usually animal proteins in the morning. I work out at lunch during the week. So I will have, like today, I've had 4 eggs cooked in butter. I've had a couple cups of coffee with heavy whipping cream and, Relight electrolyte drink. So no calories, just electrolytes. And then I'll work out. You guys are my last call this morning. So I'll work out after our interview. And so that workout, will be in what I call a carb fasted state,
Yes.
meaning I haven't had carbs since last night.
Yeah.
So I'm in an intermittent carb fasted state, but not a food fasted state because I
Yeah.
need
Sure.
I need fuel. I need to build. I can't be doing intermittent fasting, right? Intermittent fasting's for people that are pretty more sedentary, and I think that's appropriate for that kind of thing. But for as an endurance athlete, we don't do it very often. Like occasionally, like if I go crazy and go out to like a Mexican meal at a Mexican restaurant, drink a margarita and eat a bunch of chips and guacamole and like eat some beans and rice or something like that on a special night with like family or something, then the next morning I'll probably intermittent fast and go into that workout at lunch in an intermittent fasted state, right?
Exactly.
And do the
Yeah.
workout, then break my fast.
Yeah.
So, I do it strategically when it's appropriate, right? But I don't overuse it. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
It makes total sense. You talked about, just a quick sideline here, but you talked about your race weight. So what do you? I'm assuming your race weight is less than your average weight, or is it more? I don't know,
Yeah,
but
so
I'm
I
assuming it's
train.
less.
Yeah, I train about 140 to 142, and then I race at about 138, 139. It doesn't take me much to get down there. I
Yeah.
just got to
Okay.
be a little strict here. I just got to strict up, maybe 2 weeks, um, and I'll drop it. Especially if in the taper, a 2 week typical 2 week taper, I'll do like a 7 day keto reset where I'll take my protein down a little more moderate when I'm in that lower volume kind of taper mode,
Exactly.
and then bring back strategic carbs about 3 days out from the
Okay.
race to
Cool.
top off glycogen, make sure all the stores are topped off, that kind of thing. And the other thing I think I should mention when we were talking about meals during the day and timing, if I'm going into that workout in a carb fasted state, I'm going to break the carb fast after my workout. So when I'm in this depleted state of like, hey, I need to top off glycogen, I need more protein, I'm going to be protein, carbs, I'm going to have fruit for lunch after my workout. If I'm doing a harder workout, I might have a little bit of carbs in the morning, like a couple hours before the workout. Sometimes that might be as simple as just a spoonful of raw honey. And sometimes that might be like a banana or something, or berries or something like
Exactly.
that. Or sometimes a whey, raw egg, raw milk, a protein smoothie with some blueberries or something and some raw honey might be something I might have on like as a breakfast on a day I'm going to do a really hard workout, because I don't want
Yeah.
anything heavy in my gut. Right. So I
Sure.
want something that's liquid that I'm going to break down. I'm going to have it like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I'm not going to work out till 11, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No. No. I follow. What about? So, do you train? How many times a week? Do you train every day, or do you have? How does it work?
Yeah, I rarely take a day off. Like if I do, I might
Yeah.
cross train. I might hike with
That's
my
yeah.
13-year-old son, or I might go for a bike ride. I still mountain bike and have a gravel bike, and so I spend some time still cycling. So I might cross train as a workout instead of in lieu of a rest day.
Yeah. Gotcha. What about do you do any strength training at all or anything like that? Gym?
Yeah, 2 to 3 days a week. I'm in the gym. Tuesdays and Thursdays, like today is a strength training day. So I'll go to the gym. I'll do full body, core, mobility. So start with a mobility routine, work into upper body, lower body strength. And it depends on the timing in the week. So usually Tuesdays are usually my heaviest day. Sunday mornings or Tuesdays are my heavy day in the weight room, one or the other, depending on the workouts that week. And then usually my long runs on Fridays. So my Thursday workout, like today, will be more like balance work. So like, one-legged stuff, more like unilateral work versus bilateral work. So, working on like one-legged RDLs and Bulgarian split squats and ATG split squats and, that kind of stuff on the lower body. And then upper body will be really light today. It will be like push-ups and pull-ups, bunch of core work, and then a bunch of mobility work too.
Do you
Yeah.
feel
Excellent.
core work is pretty? How important is core work for something like running?
Really important, especially for ultras, because what happens is that our musculature and posture breaks down when we're fatigued. So posture becomes, one of the phenomenon of the weird lean, especially in
Yeah.
older athletes,
Yeah.
Yeah,
is very prevalent in our sport, right? It's in the 100, 200 distance. You see it a lot. And
Get them keeling
you
over.
know, yeah, or bent forward, right? It's where their
Yeah.
posture can't hold them up anymore. So it's a combination of electrolytes. It's a combination of electrolytes and dehydration and weak core. And it's a little of everything. It's not just one of them. So, I have a couple of guys. I coach one athlete who's in his 60s, and he does mobility every single day. He does core work every day. But he had some leaning, and he was only doing core work 3 days a week. We moved to 7 days a week, and we dialed in some of his electrolytes and like hydration rate depending on different heat scenarios and his sweat rate. So on some testing and dialed in a little more, and he hasn't had a lean since. So knock on wood.
That's fantastic.
yeah. I just asked that question just because, like, it's kind of funny. Me and my ex-girlfriend, one day we measured each other, right? And so my lower body was about an inch longer than hers, but my upper body was like 20 to 30 inches longer than her. She's 5'4". I'm 6'2". And I just realized one day, like, shit, like maybe a guy with a bigger upper body like me should be doing more, core
Swimming.
work and trunk and stuff like that, is swimming.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. Like we have to hold ourselves up and hold good posture to be able to open up your lungs and get more oxygen. And so whenever we start to hunch a little bit or that kind of thing where we can't hold ourselves up anymore, then we're limiting oxygen intake even in an event, right? So if you're restricting your oxygen flow by 10% or something during a race, that's going to be significant over 100 miles, right?
So
Or
it's
the last
better
50
to
miles of a race.
Yeah. Massive. Massive. Yeah.
Yeah.
so run more upright is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of taught in running technique to think about you being a marionette and someone pulling a string straight up through your head. If you ran a string right down through your head, through your spine, that if you pulled yourself up, you should be in a good posture, and then you lean from your ankles. Like you flex your ankles and that's your lean. It's a controlled fall when you run. So you want good posture, right? And so that's what we think about a lot. Now, there's nuances to that once you get into like technical trail running and mountain running, because downhill running, you gotta squat a little bit. You gotta fall into your squat just a touch into your hips to be able to like handle like suspension and technical terrain and that kind of thing. But generally, we're talking about good posture, and 3/4 or 2/3 of your core is your obliques. And so we really work on oblique work, right? Like dead bugs, oblique presses, bridges, and glute bridges, because you want to work both sides, right? And a little bit of crunches for the beach body abs. But it doesn't really, like a bunch of core, like a bunch of like just crunches is not gonna do, like, it's not gonna build the strength you need for running and holding yourself upright. Like for long-term success in everything you do, whatever sport it is, you need to be working your obliques and focusing on your obliques. And I also do like, planks, planks, dead bugs, obliques, crunches, and glute bridges. That's the 5 moves I do.
Okay. And then just one more, Claus, I think you got a question too.
Yes.
Is just with you're talking about dehydration and stuff like that. What is, you're drinking a electrolyte or something to drink right there. What's like your typical targets for things like magnesium, potassium, sodium? We'll just call those like the main minerals.
Well, I mean, sodium and potassium are the most important two, somewhere in a 2-to-1 to a 6-to-1 ratio of sodium to potassium. A little trace magnesium, trace calcium is great. You don't really need anything else. You don't really dump a ton of magnesium and calcium during exercise in your sweat. It's mainly sodium and potassium. And sodium and potassium have kind of this kind of like ratio that the body likes to maintain. So you need to have both coming in during exercise with your water. So we call it mineralizing your water. So thinking about it on a per liter drink rate. So if you're, we recommend our athletes to do Precision Hydration's sodium concentration sweat test. It's about a $200 or $300 test. And Precision's is the only one I recommend personally. It's a medical grade test that was patented into a briefcase test by Precision. So it's a medical grade quality test, and it tells you what everyone's unique in their sodium concentration per liter of sweat. So I can't give you a blanket number. I can only tell you out of 10,000 people plus that Precision's tested, the average is 900 milligrams per liter. So we know 900 is the middle of the road, but there's outliers from 200 to 2,400. So, and we've had a ton of athletes. We probably had 70 athletes in our cohort, in our roster of coached athletes, because I have 3 assistant coaches. One of my coaches is certified to give the Precision test. We really geek out on this stuff, and as coaches, one of the things we recommend is like, hey, if you're going to do this, if you want to do more than 150K, then you should probably go get this test if you're going to do multiple ultras, especially if you're going to do long ultras, because it really shows up at 8 to 12 hours, that depletion, if you're off, right? If you're not hitting your number. So you want to hit 80 to 100% of that number per liter drink rate. I've been tested. I'm 940, so I'm right in the average. But we've got a ton of athletes well over 1,000, 1,200, 1,300. We have a 1950. We have a 1545. We have a 400. We have a 600. We have like the whole gamut spectrums. It's very unique to the individual, and it's genetic. So knowing that, then you just need to know what your number is. Now, we have athletes start at 600, 800 milligrams per liter if they haven't had the test. And then we tinker in long runs with like symptoms and in races. If they are like, oh no, I can't get the test, or there's no provider close, and it might be 3 or 4 months before they can like actually work a test in, then we'll work with them and try to dial it in as much as we can. That's always a fun puzzle as a coach, to see how close you can get, and then they go get the test and whether you got close or not.
Oh, yeah.
How do you do that? How do you guess or guesstimate?
Well, so we're looking at like symptoms in longer races, especially if they're over 7 or 8 hours. So like, for example, if someone's taking, say, 900 milligrams per liter, and, 7 hours in, they're getting nausea and like their heart rate, feel like they can't get their heart rate up, right? Which means they're getting a blood volume drop, right? So if they're having those kind of symptoms, we're going to say, okay, well, let's bump it up 200 milligrams per liter, and and we'll keep tinkering, right? And if they're still having those symptoms, then we bump it up another 200, right? So like we kind of use specific symptoms of what shows, like, low sodium per liter typically is going to be not be able to get your heart rate up, low blood volume, meaning you're getting a blood volume drop. So you just feel like you're like there's a monkey on your back and you can't run. And a lot of people like mistake that for bonking, meaning they take more carbs when they don't need more carbs, they just need more sodium per liter.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other piece of the puzzle is and I would be remiss if I don't mention this for those out there that are tinkering with this, is your sweat rate per hour. So that's another piece of the puzzle that we have to coach. And that's just a simple at-home digital scale test where you weigh yourself with no clothes on, go for, gear up, go for a 1 hour run. If it's in an ultra, we run aerobics. So we say, go run whatever intensity you're going to race at. And so run your race intensity for 1 hour, come back, towel off sweat, strip down, towel off all the extra sweat so you don't have any sweat weight. Don't pee, don't drink, because otherwise you got to figure that in. And then weigh yourself again in 1 hour. Whatever you lose, if you lose 1 pound, that's 16 ounces, then you're in that temperature and humidity, you need to drink, 16 ounces per hour. So, for example, I've charted myself, and we have everybody do this in a spreadsheet. And so they might get 3 or 4 data points, let's say 40, 60, 80. Then we can extrapolate from those 3 data points. We can extrapolate every 5 degrees. And then they can like look at a race window and say, okay, the high is going to be this, the low is going to be this, and then look at the race window. We know the heat of the day is 11 to 5. We know the coolest part of the day is midnight to, dawn. So we know that's their lowest drink rate, whatever it is, say it's 40 and 80. Let's say they have to drink a half a liter at 40 and a liter at 80 degrees. Then we know in the heat of the day, they're drinking a liter an hour. And in the cool of the morning, they're drinking 500 or a half a liter an hour. And then they might split the difference halfway through the morning as it heats up. So 750 milliliters an hour type of scenario. So that kind of gives you just like a crash course. And like, those are the 2 puzzle pieces that we're looking at in hydration for athletes. And then the other piece of the puzzle is just lifestyle hydration, like drinking, using something with no calories to mineralize your water, especially pre-workout, post-workout, trying to get, especially from we're talking from a low carb perspective, right? Your audience is low carb. So,
yeah, most.
Right. So, or they're thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you need, you're going from a processed diet to an unprocessed diet, for example. All of a sudden you go from like a ton of added sodium in your diet to zero, right?
Yes.
And the body needs sodium to function, and probably somewhere in the 5 to 8 grams a day to function, just to carry on normal function. So if you go to zero, if you heavily salt your food, and I've taken the time to measure heavily salting my food 3 meals a day, you're going to get maybe a gram to a gram and a half of sodium from heavily salting. Because we have athletes all the time. Oh, no, man, I heavily salt my food. Yeah, you're only getting about a gram and a half a day. So where's that other gram and a half to 3 grams coming from, right? So minimum of 3 grams a day. So I shoot for, we have athletes either use something like Element or Relight, Redmond Relight, both good quality approaches to like electrolytes in your water for daily stuff.
Yes.
I do, 500 milligrams of sodium per pint. I try to drink multiple pints a day. So I'm trying to get 2 to 3 grams from just drinks during the day.
Yes.
As a lifestyle approach. What's that?
Do you sweat much?
I'm pretty heavy sweater.
Heavy sweater. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm losing about 2 pounds in 80 degrees.
Wow.
That's
so 2 pounds an hour. And you also got to remember that like 1 hour, your body actually stabilizes a little. It's not going to continue to lose 2 pounds every hour, right? If you were like not replenishing it right. But this is giving you ballparks. We're trying to hit ballparks here, right?
Yeah.
Of like approximate temperature, approximate drink rate.
Jeff, do you have any? Do you have situations, either yourself or with the people that you are coaching, that they are drinking too much fluid? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can do that. Like we have both sides of the spectrum, right? Where you don't drink enough per hour, but some people might be drinking too much per hour, and it's definitely like that's why we have people test, because we've seen in our cohort of athletes with this, just doing the scale test, for example, like how much you lose in 1 hour.
Yes.
we've got athletes who and keep in mind that this is somewhat trainable, right? So if you're more heat adapted with some like sauna work and or training in the winter or training in the summer, right? Or something like that, that might change a little bit. So we have people track throughout the year. The sodium concentration per liter of sweat is genetic. So you don't really need to retest that, right? You just need to do the scale test kind of often and just check in. Has it changed much? That kind of thing. But we've seen athletes, 55 degrees, I lose 750 milliliters an hour. I have an athlete I coach that loses 1.5 liters at 55 degrees.
Yeah.
So he loses a lot
Huge
at
difference.
90.
Didn't
Yeah.
do you keep in touch much with Mike McKnight?
Yeah, I coach him still.
Gotcha. Because didn't he have something with? I thought he mentioned something about sodium or something from the Cocodona 250 and like kind of like ballooning a little bit from that.
He ballooned big time. I think he overdrank. That's what we've kind of figured out. He overdrank and he over-sodiumed. So meaning too much sodium per liter plus too much sodium, not enough potassium. So he threw in a bottle of Relight, which is just sodium. They have a capsule that's just sodium and no potassium. And they have another one called Relight Plus has sodium and potassium in the capsule. But this was his mistake. He threw in that bottle and then they started giving him that capsule, which was just sodium. And so he ballooned like crazy. He gained like 25 pounds or something. And his gut was like otherworldly.
Wow.
It went from having a 6-pack to having, a giant beer gut. It looked like a giant beer gut.
Amazing.
But yeah, like that, you can mess that stuff up too, right? If you don't dial it in. And I would say, everyone's got to tinker in training to figure this out. This isn't something we like test on race day. This is something we're testing in long runs with athletes. We're testing regularly to see like, oh, how's my drink rate doing this heat in heat? How's it doing cold? What should it be to dial it in to get an idea of like what works for you? And sometimes those numbers can be a little off. Like, for example, all the sweat testing or the volume of sweat test that Mike did, he figured out that like I can't drink at that level because I gain water weight. So something is going on with him where he can't, like he's got to be lower than what his tests show per hour.
Exactly.
Or else he gains a bunch of like water weight. So, it just depends on the individual and we have to kind of customize that as a coach. Sometimes, sometimes people can just, get their 2 tests and figure it out and dial it in and they're good. Most people can. And then we might have a unique one like Mike, who every once in a while, like, that those numbers don't necessarily correlate to his working in the field.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up in reality. I think it's super interesting, Jeff. Really, really interesting stuff. And I think my takeaway from this is just that we, because there's a lot of talk about you have to use in the low carb community about you have to salt like this and you have to drink like this and whatever. And I think the takeaway here is that's all fine and good, but it's really individual and you have to dial it in for yourself and you have to I don't know, trust your body, get measured, or do whatever you need to do to figure it out.
Well, and I think the other thing is that it's very unique to the exercise level too, right?
Yeah,
so,
obviously.
Especially in low carb, right? There's so many people that get chronically low carb if they're exercising a lot, where they get like almost carb phobic. And it's like, no, carbs have a place in our diet. They regulate hormones. They signal that we're not in starvation mode, that we're not in a time of lean, from our hunter-gatherer ancestral days. So
it's a good...
Right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think we have a fair share of people who probably, it can get a little bit religious, to put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was there at one time. I mean, I was really, really strict and like you kind of get carb phobic. But the one thing after coaching it for almost a decade, like the one thing we find especially when it correlates, when we correlate it with endurance training.
Yes.
Like you have to use carbs at times. And if you don't, you're gonna pay the piper with your thyroid and your hormones and like all that kind of stuff. And at some point it's gonna catch up to you. And you might feel great for 2 or 3 years. But then at some point, and I would say it's also very unique to male versus female. So biologically, females need more carbs. to regulate their hormones and their cycle every month. And so one of the things we found with our female athletes, we actually don't coach them in a strict low carb approach that I've kind of been mentioning, where we use the OFM and strategic carbohydrate use. We actually coach them with a little more moderate carbs and not super low carb to regulate hormones, and use something called fuel separation method as a kind of a different approach for women.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things we're trying to do with Goody and here with Low Carb Logic is we're trying to break the I wouldn't call it fanatic, but let's say the little bit carb phobic, like you call it, the carb phobic attitude, and get some different viewpoints, and that's why it's just very great to have someone like you talking about this here on our.
Yeah, fruit's good, man. Fruit is really good, so we should eat fruit.
I just have one more question. I know we're kind of coming up on an hour here, but why? And Klaus, any other question you have? But why?
Yes.
Why potatoes? Like, of all the carbohydrates.
Well, one, they're a high carbohydrate source. So when we need to bring in carbs quick and fast, and so our typical, like, I use a lot of fruit, but I occasionally use potatoes and like occasionally white rice. So, white rice is probably the lowest like anti-nutrient grain out there because it's a pseudo grain, right? It's an aquatic grass. So, right. So it's probably one of the ones that we could kind of, if you're metabolically healthy, you can handle that carb load, especially if you're in the context of endurance training or strength training. One of the things that Mike McKnight's found tinkering over the years, he got really low carb and kind of carb phobic for a lot of years. And he and I butted heads over that a little bit over the years because I was kind of ahead of him in my evolution. I had kind of like started to use carbs more again, strategically, and he was still pretty carb phobic. But one of the things he found, he really got into strength training last couple of years, like big time, like spending a lot of time in the gym. He's like, I don't care if I put on extra muscle, if it messes with my performance, because I enjoy being in the gym. So he started playing around with like really strategically timing carbohydrates around his strength training workouts, which gave him way more intensity. He was able to and he got leaner because he wasn't giving himself enough carbohydrate to like perform in the gym. Carbs have a place. We just have to use them appropriately and understand how they work in the system for performance, whether that's just like on the job performance or like in the gym performance or, ultra running performance, whatever it means, there's still an appropriate place. It's one of the macros. Now, I wouldn't agree with the high carb camp that it's like the macro. It's probably the one macro we can actually do without and still be okay, especially when they have a lot of protein, right?
Yes.
And especially in the context of ancestral eating and seasonal eating, we wouldn't have had a lot of carbs around. Only the last 100 years have we had ample carbs at our disposal. But before that, it was seasonal, right? It's like 2 or 3 months in most latitudes, 2 or 3 months, that it was available to us, and we would gorge on them and gain a bunch of weight and signal to the system to put on weight because winter's coming. And then we'd go into a ketogenic state or a high protein, a carnivore keto state for the whole winter, spring, early summer again, 7-8 months, and then back to like that cycle again. So every year. And one of the cool things about that cycle is that we put on weight and then we cut weight. We put on weight and we cut weight in that seasonal eating pattern of our ancestors. And you know what happens? Toxins bind to fat. So
yes.
And then we shed the fat and we shed the toxins.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really cool cycle that the body naturally does. So for example, I let myself put on like 6 pounds after the Colorado Trail FKT in August, right? I destroyed myself 7 day, of running on the 490-mile Colorado Trail for a fastest known time.
Did you get it?
I got it in that direction. There's a fastest known time supported in every direction, north, south, and then there's there's a variation in the middle through the collegiate peaks. So there's collegiate west, collegiate east. So there's 4 records, right? 2 southbound, 2 northbound. So I got one of the northbound record, collegiate west. Afterwards, my body is destroyed. I ran 177 hours in 7 days and 9 hours. Right. So it's like your body is like goes into like it's cannibalized itself, it's like lost muscle mass, it's like after the inflammation went away after a couple days, like looking at myself in the mirror, I was like, oh my gosh, like you could see veins in my stomach and my ribs, like I looked crazy thin and lean, and I lost like 10 pounds. Okay, so I was down to like low 130s. And so, but it all comes back quick, right? It's interesting, but I just went crazy. I ate a ton of food, right? And I ate a ton of carbs too. For like about 2 weeks, I went crazy. I ate whatever. I didn't care. I mean, I still ate good. I still eat whole foods. But I mean,
Yes.
I was eating rice and I was eating like the bun on a burger. I wasn't like doing a lettuce wrap anymore like I normally do. I was just going crazy and drank a bunch of extra. I drank beer a little bit, and then at some point I was like, got on the scale, I was like, whoa, 146. That's crazy. So
20 pounds, 15.
yeah, so like I and immediately started going back to my normal routine, and it started like trickling off. But when you look at that, like that binds to a bunch of toxins in my system, right? That extra 6 pounds. And then I
Yeah,
shed that 6 pounds and I shed a bunch of toxins with it. It's a natural
yeah.
cleanse.
It's good stuff. Is this I was going to ask you what your typical recovery routine is after a long race. I don't know if it's always like 2 weeks of pigging out, but
It
but
normally is not. No, that was like unique situation, right? Like the Colorado Trail was crazy.
yeah,
That was the craziest thing I've ever done.
yeah,
Normally it's the first 48 to 72 hours after a big race, especially hundreds, 200s, you're in an inflammatory phase, right? So I high protein, low carb, like really
yes,
low carb. So
yeah,
really high protein for about 48 to 72 hours when I'm in the inflammatory window. That knocks inflammation down really fast. That gets all the inflammation. And once the inflammation's gone, then I'll bring back carbs, normal carbs like fruit and potatoes and stuff
sure,
like that. That's when
yeah,
I'll go. Like if the race ended on Sunday, by Wednesday, I take the family out to a local place where we have like, a really good long fermented sourdough pizza crust. It's a
nice,
brewery with a pale ale, and that would be my quote cheat night with the family to celebrate, say, a race. But I wait. I don't celebrate right after the race. I wait like till I'm out of the inflammatory phase, and then that one meal's a blip. It's nothing, right? But if I did it during the inflammatory phase, I'm going to balloon up more. So, I'm going to get more swelling in my knees and my ankles, and like I'm in my face and everything else, puffy eyes,
sure,
all that kind of stuff that I used to get as a high carb athlete. But I noticed when I went to a low carb approach, I don't get that and I
yeah,
recover way faster. So the recovery's big when you do high protein, low carb afterwards. And I'll still do some carbs, but like low carb berries,
yeah,
it'd all
yeah,
be
yeah.
low carb fruit or vegetables, in
Actually,
that phase. And then I go back to my normal eating habits that we've been talking about today, strategic carbohydrate use, because usually I'm back moving, back in the weight room, I'm back on my bike initially after say 100 miler or 200 miler in the first 4 or 5 days, and then by the end of the week I'm back running.
What about? I wanted to ask you about. You said on Fridays you have your long run of the week. How long is your long training run of the
Well, just
week?
in context, it depends on where I am in a training cycle. So that could be as short as 2 or 2.5 hours, and that could be as long as 5 to 6 or even 10 hours. So
Yeah,
depends
wow,
on what the workout is. Like I have a 50 miler coming up in 2 weeks from this Saturday. So I'll do a long workout tomorrow, probably a combo run bike on Friday. And then I'm going to the Grand Canyon, do rim to rim to rim, solo. I have some friends running it slower. They're starting at like 3 a.m. on Saturday morning to do the whole thing. And I'm going to start at like dawn, and then I'll try to do it in the daylight. So I'll try to do it in like 9.5, 10 hours. So it'll be a little more like focused workout, like and that'll probably be like a 10-hour effort, 9.5, 10-hour effort. It'll be 40, whatever, 43 miles in the
wow.
canyon.
So I just looked up. Jim Walmsley did it in 5 hours and 55 minutes, which is
Yep.
just
That
berserk.
is the record. That is the fastest known time. And there's been multiple fast guys try to break that over the years, and no one's been able to do it yet. Like Jim's time is pretty amazing on, you know, rim to rim to rim.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're just doing
Fast.
it for fun.
Yeah, I'm just doing it for fun, man. Social, I mean,
Just
I'll
a
just
hike.
run solo, but the cool thing is Fridays and Saturdays of any time of the year, if it's a nice day, there's going to be people doing rim to rim to rim. It's become so popular. So I'll see probably at least 15 or 20 runners out doing it, plus my two friends. So, and they're older and they're a little slower than me. So, and so I'll still get a good workout in, but I'll catch up to them, hang out, talk to them a bit, go tag the North Rim, come back down, see them again, somewhere. I don't know where I'll catch them, but they'll have about a 4-hour lead on me. But it makes it fun
Fantastic.
too, like going to
Yeah.
look for them.
No, that's amazing, Jeff. Before we go, I just wanted to ask you if you have any wise words or good advice or life advice for our listeners here.
I got a question for
Well, I would say this one is enjoy food. Like, don't get carb phobic, don't get dogmatic. Like, be open to new stuff too. Like, I like to say this is from Tony Horton of Beachbody. I'm a flexitarian, so be flexible. You know,
Yeah.
be willing to admit that maybe I was wrong. On that and change. So but don't be afraid to stick to your guns either. And if you really are passionate about something and you feel like you're on the right path, and do it. And I would say also, mobility and strength if I was going to pick one thing besides diet to focus on for longevity and health, long-term health, it would be strength training. Mobility and strength training, they go hand in hand because you need good movement patterns, good range of motion. This is how we get hurt as we age. It's like go to pick something up and
Follow.
or we trip and we can't catch ourselves anymore because we can't do a deep lunge, right? Be able to do a deep lunge and like have really good, mobility of your shoulders and be able to put your hand down and like, and catch yourself. We do that all the time in running, right? So trail runners understand this. Mountain runners understand this. You're running down a trail at 10-minute pace, and all of a sudden you kick a rock or a root, and all of a sudden you go from 10-minute pace to 5-minute pace, windmilling forward, trying not to kiss dirt, right? And the one thing that will keep you 9 out of 10 times from kissing dirt is good mobility and strength and range of motion. And if you don't work those things, then you kiss dirt 9 out of 10 times. And then that's when you go to the hospital. That's when you lose your teeth, break your face, whatever, break an arm, collarbone, doesn't matter, skin your knee. But the point is, I think one thing that I see in the weight room that really like irks me as a coach, and that is a bunch of guys pushing heavy weight with like not full range of motion.
Yeah,
It's
shitty
like
range of motion. Yeah,
the
classic.
crap and fast, like really fast, right? So like
squats.
70% of your strength gains come from eccentric load, lowering the weight. So when you're
Yes.
doing pull-ups, for example, right? Don't do them fast. Like lower. Keep
Yeah.
everything engaged at the bottom right before you fully hang, and then
Slow it down, everything.
right,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
or same with push-ups, right?
Yep.
Go down slow, explode up. Go down
Yes.
slow, explode up. So always lower the weight slow. You get tons of strength gains. It's better to do 3 good than 10 fast.
Wow, I'm going
100%.
to do that today at my lift. I have a closeout question as well. Feel free to not answer this question if you don't want to. But when you look at 2025, I watch a lot of UFC.
If you guys can hear me, for some reason, I've lost audio.
We can hear you.
Not sure what happened there.
We
Can
can.
you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got full audio gone. Let me unplug my headphones and see.
All right, what about now? Nothing.
Shit, I'm not going to get asked my question.
Let me just try and see if we can.
Hey, can you hear me?
No.
Okay, I'm back with the laptop
All
audio.
right, cool.
I don't know what happened there. Technical difficulties.
Life.
It's all good. So you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry about that. All of a sudden, you guys just went mute. I don't know what happened.
So my final question is, feel free not to answer this question, but I watch a lot of UFC. I'm a pretty competitive guy myself, and this is all just in fun and games. But when you look into 2025, And you look at, is there a race that you're really trying to conquer? Is there somebody that, won a race last year that's like, hey, watch out, buddy, I'm coming for you this year? Like, is there any of those that come to mind?
Well, I am going back to do another 200 this year. Hopefully the race director will let me in because it's full, but we'll see. I know the race director, so hopefully she'll let me in. But I'm doing a 200 in Washington, hopefully in August. So I would be shooting for the course record there. That's a big focus. Another big focus is Western States in late June, Western States 100. Peter Defty at Vespa and one of my athletes have teamed up together to get me in through a sponsorship slot to Western States to bypass the lottery to go after the 50 plus record at Western States. So, that being such a big race in the US for ultra running, kind of the Super Bowl of ultra runs in North America is the last weekend in June in California. I would, I'm going after that record. So that's one of the few age group records I care about. Other than that, it would be like overall course records on stuff. But that race is so deep and such a field, and it's gotten faster and faster. And especially with what we understand now with like the sodium testing and the drink rates and the nutrition and the science behind nutrition has really like, in the last 5 or 6 years has really like kind of exploded in our sport. Crazy, it went from just guys just tinkering and trying things to like, hey,
but people like you.
Yeah, here's the strategy. You dial it in for you. And so we have guys don't blow up like they used to. And so the field's way deeper, there's money in the sport now, and there's eyes on the sport brand wise and with social media. Social media has been great for athletes from a making money perspective. I mean, we're still like way in the dark ages in ultra running compared to other sports, but we're growing and things are changing, and it's been cool to watch that evolution go from like, hey, here's some free shoes and a kit with a logo on it for free, and you pay for everything else yourself. That's where it started as a sponsorship, in our sport, to getting some kind of a salary, whether it be a small salary or, some of the top guys in the sport are getting, hopefully okay salaries now, from what I hear. I'm an aging, so I'm more in the, probably in the middle of the sport as far as salaries go. But I also have a really successful coaching business. So I'm not really worried about like, I don't have to make a bunch of money off of running. Excellent. It just kind of supplements my training time for me in my head.
Cool.
Wisdom is worth its gold.
Fantastic. I wish you the best of luck with all of that. Very, very, very inspiring. I don't do ultra running, but I certainly, it feels like I have to start now, or start to do something anyway. I'm a cyclist, so I do a lot of cycling, but not really ultra. So I do.
Well, see, I love cycling. I mean, that was my first passion in endurance sports. In my 20s, I was a big mountain biker, raced a little bit, rode like 4 or 5 days a week, every week, did weekend trips, all that kind of stuff to like Moab and Durango and over the years, and Sedona. When I was in college, I even traveled to Sedona in the early 90s. So I was an early adopter of mountain biking. So love the bike. I've always said that if I ever couldn't run anymore, the bike's going to be the thing. So I've always kept the bike in the mix. I love keeping it. I love how I feel on the bike. I love how you can go. One of the coolest things I think about the bike with regard to ultra running is that you could go and do like a pretty hard long run workout. Let's say 3.5 hours with like aerobic threshold, steady state type effort. And if you tried to come back and run, say 2.5 hours the next day at like a high end aerobic zone, high zone 2, low zone 3, you couldn't do that running, but you could come back on the bike the day after and do that kind of a workout.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the bike. You just it doesn't beat you up. You can do more volume on it. And it's fun. Like the technology of bikes is crazy. Like, I just got a new bike, a new mountain bike, and a cross country kind of down country, cross country bike, and man, it's fun. You just throw those things around. It's fun.
It's so flexible. I think it's so flexible because you can kind of, you can dial your pace in a little bit if you're not feeling, top of your game. You can drive a little bit slower, but it's still nice. And
totally.
No, good stuff.
Cool
stuff.
Well, thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it, and cheering for you moving forward, and looking forward to everything that you do.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. Appreciate it.